The Fairport Central School District. I have here with me is our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Matt Stevens, and we have our partners from Campus Construction, and I'm not sure Labella, our architects, will be here as well. They might join and provide some context. And I saw Principal Bob Clark. He will be here as we move through the presentation to help give context. Welcome to this presentation. I believe this is our fourth presentation. We've also done presentations to our staff and individual PTA groups as needed as well. So there is a vote on Fairport Forward 2020-22 on December 13th, coming right up, 2022. And I assume that's why you're here, to get information, ask questions. I mean, we're such a small group here. You know, I think that's the best way to move through this. We do have slides. We'll be happy to ask questions and as we move along. But where are we? Like, what are we doing here? How did we get here, right? There was an entire process behind Fairport Forward 2019, right? We're in 2022 right now, right? So in 2019, we partnered with the University of Rochester, and we met with hundreds of school members, which included teachers, students, parents, administrators, board members, and we interacted with the community. We were able to get thousands of pieces of data from focus groups, from actual surveys that asked people to tell us what their expectations and their hopes are for our schools, the expectations for our facilities moving forward. And that's where you'll sort of see this timeline here. This advisory council gave us good feedback on educational programming expectations, how we spend our dollars, make sure they're done so in wise fashion, and what do we do with our facilities? They're aging. And many of them found them to be adequate, but more people wanted us to be more than adequate. They wanted us to have exemplar facilities. They have facilities that have curb appeal. They have facilities that when people are looking for homes, they come to Fairport because, let's face it, schools are a center of our community. And you'll see that in May 28th of 2019, the Board of Education had a resolution to merge Minerva's Land and Fairport High School. We have declining enrollment. We have assurances, or we have confidence that over the next several years, 5 and projecting into 10 years, even though you can't give a sound, nobody's going to sign their name on a 10-year projection. However, based upon the numbers, based upon people's habits and family dynamics and makeup, we're going to have classes between 400 and 450 students. Right? That's going to impact our overall enrollment. So that's why we're thinking about consolidating facilities, and we'll talk about our reasonings behind that in a bit. So that was in May of 2019. We went through a whole bunch of meetings just like this to get ideas for how do we make our schools warm, welcoming, and engaging environments. And this is what we came up with. This was Fairport Forward 2019. Much better than listening to me. My name is Brett Provenzano, Superintendent of Fairport Schools. The 2019 project has been amazing. It's great to see the energy. Our students have gone out of their way to say how it's made learning fun. If you take a look and walk around our schools, our community expects that we give our students warm, welcoming, and engaging environments.
The 2019 project really dates back to assessing our needs on building condition survey and, soliciting some feedback from the community about how they felt about our buildings. And what you would have heard back then is like that really well maintained but very antiquated buildings. What we're seeing right now, 2022, is we're just starting to experience the upgrading of some of those facilities and really kind of bringing us in line with our peers and around the county, and creating really great flexible learning spaces for kids.
Renewed excitement in what the school district is. People have a really great love for this district, I think more so than you would see in most other districts. But facilities, especially in our fields, were aging.
Science rooms received the most benefit in the last capital project vote. We were able to renovate and expand, update our facilities. They were quite outdated. They didn't really accommodate 21st century learning. And so what we have now are spaces where it's flexible seating, kids can move around, teachers can move rooms. We have different spaces within the room that allow for more collaborative learning styles. So it's just really exciting.
We had the artificial turf redone in the stadium. The original turf was there for 10 or 11 years, and it was really getting to the point where it needed to be replaced. Where we're standing right now on the new multi-purpose turf field, the soil here, it just does not drain. So for probably as long as we've had baseball and softball here, those teams have had more away games than home games. On the surface, that may not sound like it's okay, you have to move a game here and there, but it really starts to impact families. Well, this is really going to provide us with a surface where we can play in the spring and also in the fall, in the later months as well for our fall teams.
Brand new, state-of-the-arts, fully functioning, extra amenities beyond what a lot of colleges would rival, and the excitement that rallies around that is incredible.
It looks beautiful now. I feel like they took in our advice and our opinions voiced. They took it in really well, and they did a beautiful job.
The cafeteria is wonderful. In addition to it being a place where the kids are eating, the other spaces in there are huge. So, there can be club meetings, there can be meetings with teachers.
I want to say it's pushing 40,000 square feet of kitchen, cafeteria, serving line, cooking area, which is absolutely amazing.
The new dining hall is really nice, especially the senior lounge. I really like having a space where I can go during lunch to chill out, and it's very nice to see a lot of my friends in there.
The oohs and the ahs the first couple weeks from students when they came in the doors and seeing the cafeteria for the first time, seeing those new science labs, stepping foot and watching how expansive this complex that we're standing on right now is, it pumps up the energy up. You can tell just by the look on people's faces.
We've been talking to the community for several years now on the importance of having pride in our facilities, making sure that we have welcoming facilities that meet the needs of an expansive program. Our community expects it, our students deserve it, and our Board of Education has responded to that expectation and need. So that's what we did from our 2019 project, but also what was not in that video, it was deeper than just there's pictures of science classrooms, cafeteria, which students really enjoy. They say that it's great to come to school in an environment that's fresh and welcoming and flexible. They could be eating in the cafeteria, but at the same time, they could be meeting with a group in the breakout rooms that were created. You'll see that there was a new loop. Has anybody ever been to Jefferson Avenue? The Jefferson Avenue School, they had a very restrictive parking lot where buses and parents were dropping off at the same time. It wasn't safe. So we constructed a new lot, safe lot. Our community expects to drop their kids off in a safe lot. Kids need and deserve that right to have a lot that's controlled, that's organized. You'll see playgrounds that were renovated here at Jefferson Avenue as well, with equipment that is safe and up to date and accessible to all students, when in the past that wasn't always the case. Mr. Stevens is going to talk about some of the other parts that we've done in this project and others to address our facilities needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Provenzano. So on this slide, you'll just see a summary of a lot of the different work that's taken place through a 2015 capital project, through general fund dollars, the 2019 capital project, and then what we're allowed to do for $100,000 projects on an annual basis that the state will aid us on, from upgrading and putting in place secure vestibules across our district at our school buildings. So that work is continuing to happen again through this summer at our elementaries and middle schools. We did a few over this past summer and continue to do that. We've done roof replacement. We have done door replacements, exterior door replacements where that's been needed. And then through the state passed back in 2014 a Smart Schools Bond Project for school districts across the state, and we are accessing that money to increase security within our school buildings and adding electronic door strikes on classroom doors throughout our buildings and district. Those are a lot of the key pieces that we've tried to enhance and improve when it comes to safety and security, as well as our infrastructure in the district.
Buildings also receive boiler updates, boiler control updates, so we're running with efficiency. So we're not using 1970s technology, so we can be fiscally responsible. And I know that that was something that the board expected, that we keep sustainability in mind, that we are maximizing our dollars by using equipment that technologically allows us to be fiscally responsible and sustainable. So there's this point, the things that we have been doing, but this is the reason why you're here, to learn about the next project, phase 2. There are 3 main goals: merging 9th grade with Fairport High School. We need to stage the high school to prepare students and staff and to be welcomed to Fairport High School. We know this is not about dollars. This is about maximizing opportunities for students. We want students to be at the high school in a 912 building so they can experience the full gamut of our clubs and our electives and our programming. We also want to minimize the transition, because we know transitions are not always good for many students. So if we can lessen the transition and give students more access to programming and opportunities, we feel that that's a plus and a benefit. But in order to do that, we need to get Fairport High School ready, which we'll talk about in a little bit, what ready means and why we need to get it ready. But we're also looking to consolidate district buildings. Balmer Place is a building where special ed and some of our instructional directors are housed right now. We have spaces where we can move those professionals to Martha Brown and also to Minerva DeLand. Minerva DeLand is still a viable facility. We're not going to sell Minerva DeLand, because if you go to Minerva DeLand right now, the swimming pool is being used, the pools, the basketball courts, the volleyball courts are being used. There could be a concert going on there. Fields are being used. It's a functioning facility that meets the needs of our community. But we can start housing district offices over there, and we could sell Balmer Place and get it off the books and operate more efficiently there. We also have, and you'll see as we move along, what are we going to do with district offices on Church Street, West Church Street? We're looking to, and you'll see that as we move forward, to save our dollars and cents and to move, sell district offices and move to Minerva DeLand as well. So you'll see that later on and where that's coming, but this project will help us begin that process, and it is a process. And then we need to update our facilities. Over and over, we kept on hearing that we need to make sure that our facilities are modern, that they're engaging, that they're flexible, and they allow us to do the many different things that programming requires. Here's a timeline. You'll see that if you're a 5th grader today, this helps parents and family members and grandparents and caregivers understand. If you're a 5th grader today, you will be the first 9th grade class in 2026. And then you will see at the end of that, we will begin the administrative office consolidation, the Balmer Place sale to Martha Brown and Minerva DeLand. That's going to be the first sale. So you just see the beginning and the end, and Mr. Stevens is going to talk about what happens in the middle.
Great, thanks. So as Mr. Provenzano mentioned, looking at a December 13th, 2022 voter referendum for capital project. As we move through the process, if a project becomes approved by voters, the next step that school districts work through is the more specific design phase of a capital project. We start out with a conceptual budget and conceptual design, and then we narrow that in. We work with the users of the spaces that we'd be renovating and constructing, and really getting their feedback and input in terms of how that space comes to fruition at the end through construction. And then we have to submit those specifications to the State Education Department, where State Ed will review that, and they'll have a team of architects and engineers that ask us questions and look for feedback from us in terms of explaining certain pieces of the project. Once that finally gets approved by the State Education Department is when we're able to go out and bid the capital project. We have to go out for competitive bidding for the many different trades of any capital project. We'd go out for that process. And once bids are received back and we can approve contracts and award bids, we'd begin construction. So that's why you see construction really not starting until 2024. There's a long time frame of all of those different pieces in the timeline it takes to complete those. Sometimes it can be at State Education Department for months as they're looking through the review process. And we see a couple of years of construction. Summers are the most able months for construction in schools, but we also do see construction and try to work and balance construction throughout a school year, and we work with the building users on that process as well. So a couple of years of construction, and then ending construction in 2026. So at the beginning of the 26-27 school year, we're able to move students from Minerva Land over to Fairport High School, and then from there, start that consolidation of Balmer Place staff into our other two buildings that Mr. Provenzano mentioned, Martha Brown and Minerva Land. So that's kind of the overview and length of time as we go through projects. A good example is we voted in 2019, December of 2019 for the last project, and we're still talking about construction today in 2022 and even into the summer of 23. So it takes that kind of time to move through construction capital projects.
So we have a really special and important guest here. He could really speak to the needs of the high school, and it's he could speak to it better than anybody in this room. So I'm going to have Mr. Clark talk a little bit about what's happening outside here, but also that little orange bump out, and explaining why do we need the bump out? Why do we need to renovate when back in the day there was over 2,000 students in this building, and we're going to have less than 2,000 students. And I think Mr. Clark's going to definitely speak to it by starting with the outside.
Yeah, so just to address that simple question, the reality is that our building footprint is different right now. We use the building much different than we did in the last 15 or 20 years. So you want me to talk about the athletic piece of things? All of that stuff. Okay, I'll just go. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, so what you're seeing in terms of like part of this next project is also trying to address some deficiencies in our athletic campus. The reality is right now our current track is in the bottom right-hand corner, and it is substandard in terms of county meets and things like that. It's not big enough to hold a dual meet. It's a 6-lane track, and so the new track where this project proposes to build a new track and move it forward. It also includes an opportunity to build in stands. We don't currently have stands there for our families to sit in to watch those meets, and so that would allow our student athletes to have those larger competitions here, and again bring us up to standard with the county.
So as he's jamming through this, I'll put a little commentary. Think about the fact that we have students in Fairport. Fairport's a high-performing district. There's high expectations, lots of memories, lots of community pride. Right now, this track that's right here, right? Our students, we can't have Section 5 sanctioned county meets because our track doesn't meet the specs. If you look the inside of this, there's drainage, water issues. Can't do many games right here as well. And our fields are used. So this new track deals with that. So yes, it's good for our kids. It's good for our community. We'll be able to use it for greater events. And I think as a community, we continually hear how we are not proud of the current state. Many different surveys and outreach, and this addresses that. Mr. Clark, sorry.
Yeah, of course. And some other components you'll notice up in the middle of the diagram there. There's a parking lot. And one of the issues is that we're bringing up staff members from Minerva Land, and we need a place to house that. So that's our current tennis courts right now. Our tennis courts, very much like the track, are also substandard. There are only 5 of them. So our tennis teams are not able to hold sectionals because they don't have enough courts. And so we're always looking for, intermediate ground to have those kind of competitions. So that's just to address the athletic component of things. But I'm going to get after some of the other pieces of it and why the orange addition to the building. So the question we often get is why there was certainly a time in Fairport's history when there were over 600 plus students in a class. Why can't you just bring the 9th graders up if we're down to 400 to 450 kids a class? And as I said, the footprint of the building is very different for some fundamental reasons. One of them is we created a single point of entry in the front of the building. Our old main office used to be in a very, very small area right now that's currently a copy room. And attendance was upstairs in another small area. And as you know, school safety has really changed over the years. And by creating the single point of entry, we took out 3 English classrooms as well as a book room and had to recoup space for that. Another example of that would be the special education department. Many years ago, the special education services were confined to much smaller rooms within our school community. And in order for us to address our students' needs and the growing continuum of supports that we offer students, we're obligated to provide our students with the least restrictive environment possible to learn in. And so the footprint of special education has grown from smaller ancillary type spaces that are slightly larger than closets into full classrooms. And as we grew the continuum of special education and provided more general education settings, it impacted the number of classrooms we were using for that as well. And then a third area that's grown, especially over the last few years, and Mr. Provenzano has talked repeatedly about being very proud to serve our ENL population. There was a time when our students that come to the United States and to Fairport and speak another language, to be able to immerse them in a high school experience, used to look very different. The state of New York adopted laws to make sure that they were given the proper services to learn English and to acclimate into our school with the expectation that they will graduate with a diploma. Those expectations changed. And so in my short time being the principal at the high school, we've gone from having one part-time teacher to 3 full-time teachers because the number of ENL students has increased exponentially. And so we're, again, we're honored, as you say many times, to serve them. And they need space as well. And again, it goes from used to be a room in the library that was sometimes used maybe half of the day to, again, functioning classroom space that they need. So when you add all of those things up, that shows you the rooms that we are looking to add in the form of this STEAM bump out, which represents 5 classrooms, as well as in the front of the building. Mr. Provenzano, I want to point out that over on the other side there, on Aralt side, our library we're looking to renovate the library. And that those 2 renovations specifically provide the classrooms that we've lost in the past with the amount of instructional space that we need. And we're trying to take advantage of 2 things. We're trying to kill a couple birds with one stone. First and foremost, like our library is 30 plus years old and needs to be renovated anyways. The library is a very different space with the fact that most of our students have a one-to-one technology. They have our Chromebooks and iPads, et cetera. So research is done differently. It's an opportunity for us to re-envision a literacy-rich space and also recoup some classroom space. And then there's an advantage for us to look into STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. The state offers one-time aid, and Matt is the expert in this, but there's a benefit to us looking at, if we are going to add space, to make sure that it's space that is aided by the state, because they only provide us so much aid based on the number of students that we have and the square footage of our building. So having said that, our technology classrooms, as they exist right now, are 60 years old. We have a very, very old-fashioned auto shop. We have a very, very old-fashioned wood shop, and they don't necessarily fit the curriculum that we offer our students today. And while we represent and recognize that it's so important for us to maintain those classes as entry points into the trades, we also offer courses in electronics, robotics, and other things that it's hard to marry that technology in the spaces that we have. So one way or the other, that needed to be renovated. And so we're trying to take advantage of the aid from the state and to integrate in this space also other components of our curriculum, which would include art. We currently have a shared space in the library, which is not really a classroom, where our art classes that do graphic design and advanced photo, which are very different than our old-fashioned art room that had a dark room, they share technology with our architecture class and our electronics and robotics and DDP classes with industry standard technology, and they need a space to do that together, and this would afford them a larger classroom to do that.
So we have this really cool class called NASA Hunch. NASA, that's like, right, you're hearing that right. That's where, where there's liftoffs and, we travel to space. And our students actually engineer and design pieces for the NASA crew when they go on their launches. And it's a multidisciplinary activity. Right now, we just don't have the space, right? You see they work in these things called maker spaces, and there'll be a picture of it later. It's really confined. When you need to be able to get 30, 40 kids, we can only get 12. and you have them working in different parts of the building. It's highly inefficient, and again, using this area and combining this area, because when you're working with NASA, they want to have, family consumer science, talk about food, arts, the artists talking about designing certain artifacts that they could bring and use. And of course, our engineers and our wood shop, it's a multidisciplinary robotics. These things need functional, flexible spaces. And right now, our spaces aren't conducive to that, as Mr. Clark was sharing.
Yeah, just in a practical sense, this NASA class, our students often use the 3D printer to produce, components of whatever the project is. Every year they're given a project to solve by NASA, and it's a competition around the United States. There are very few high schools that actually participate in this. And so they have to present their ideas to scientists from NASA to see if they would work, and then they turn around, and then if they're successful, they put them in zero gravity flights, and then sometimes eventually on a space shuttle. And right now, our 3D printer, if Mr. Provenzano could show you what the current technology classroom is, over there in the left on the top, and the current NASA class is down below that on the second story, and where our art is down on the bottom. And so it's not really conducive to them using those tools. And again, most science classrooms don't require drills and the kind of technology that you would see in a technology space. And so we make do with it, and we're so incredibly proud. We've had this class for almost 20 years now. One of the first schools around the country that participated in it. But this gives us an opportunity to bring them into a makerspace. And then the last part that I think Mr. Provenzano mentioned briefly is we have an incredibly diverse group of kids that participate in our robotics club. There's 40 to 60 to 75 kids in any given year that participate in a build process. And Fairport High School does not currently have a space that's conducive to them being here. So our students have to go to Martha Brown, and they sort of have a makeshift space that they're helping us with. And this STEAM edition would offer us the opportunity to have that club housed here, so our students could participate in that process.
So it's just not about the sports, right? I mean, the sport piece it's appealing, and it does meet a big need, but we're really proud of the academic components of how we're trying to build our science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics programming. We're proud of the fact of this music renovation up here. Our music suites need to be renovated. They haven't been touched in 70 years. We brought kids and our teachers to Labella. Thank you, Labella. Great guests. And they sort of dreamed up and reimagined new spaces on where they can have rehearsal rooms, choir, sound rooms, things that our students are using on a daily basis. Right now, they just don't have access to, or they're doing it in makeshift ways. So we're proud of the fact that this project addresses multiple different needs, the academic, the social emotional, and of course the athletic interscholastic pieces. And you see this is the top floor where there'll be some basic renovations to get students ready to come over, readjusting some spaces so they can be classrooms, but minor. Most of the activities occurring here on the first floor. Here are some examples of what the library and some storage that is currently being used. Mr. Clark said 60 years in the making. At one point in time, it served its purpose, but we have different ideas and different thoughts on how it could be used, maximizing space differently. We have so much unused space, and tapping into that space, you'll be able to see that we're going to be able to create multiple different workrooms where students can meet with staff, where students can work on projects. This library will be sort of the hub of the school, lots of activity in a way that get to have our students future ready, because they're going to places just like this. Here's an example of the choir room, the music room ensemble that, again, served its purpose. Our staff and students make good use of it right now, but we could do better. This right here is an example of the auto shop. Mr. Clark, do you want to talk a little bit about the auto shop?
Yeah, so
Picture's worth 1,000 words. Maybe.
Yeah. It's obviously a very, very tight space. On the bottom left, you see that's technically what we would call his instructional space. where they're trying to introduce the labs of like how do you change oil, that kind of stuff, that the actual like instruction, and then the car space to the right of that. And unfortunately, we hadn't talked about this much. That classroom is only used 5 periods a day. And so one of our missions in this process is to make all of our spaces to be able to be used 9 periods of day, to make them more flexible, so that on one side perhaps we have the auto component of things, and on the other side the robotics piece of things. And this current like part of the building has a very low profile ceiling, which kind of prevents us from doing certain things and changing that space. And again, is extremely antiquated. No matter what happens, that space needs to be updated.
And think about it, there's a room that we can only use 4 or 5 times a day out of 9 periods, 8 periods, right?
Exactly.
So I think maximizing that space. This right here, this picture, just takes me back. Right, this is our school, right? And it's just the expectation that we need to create spaces that people are proud to come to. This is the makerspace that I was speaking of. Again, a makerspace is exactly what it sounds like. It's a place for creativity, collaboration, ingenuity. Our students make do, our teachers make do, but you can see you can only get a handful of kids. You should be able to get a multidisciplinary team in there, and like the robotics team, as Mr. Clark was referring to.
Well, it certainly limits access to those sections for our kids, and that room that's half of a room. Actually, on the other side of that window is where there's a smaller computer lab where our students that take classes like DDP, which is like an introductory course to learn how to technically draw on a computer. And there's only 6 or 8 kids in that side, and there's probably 6 or 8 kids on the other side. Standard class is somewhere between around 20 to 24 kids, and it's hard to do in those spaces.
And you'll see. Right to the right here is an art classroom. Again, this is where our students are learning. They have aspirations to go beyond school and do, art as a career or a major. But this is the space that we're working with them in currently. They make do with it, and our teachers do an amazing job, and our students perform well. I think we have like 11 electives too, so it's just not like art. Like back in the day when I took art, there were multiple iterations and multiple sequences to get students a great and expansive experience. You also see, again, here's a ceramics room. Crunched, limited in space, served purposes back in the 1970s and 80s. And you'll see the Jefferson Avenue cafeteria. That is one of the focus areas of this project at Jefferson Avenue. The cafeteria, we need to prioritize it. It's one of the oldest in the district. We need to revamp that whole area so we can make it up to standards. And so because they use this for learning environments, for assemblies, and for cafeterias. So all of our elementary schools could use the work, but we had to prioritize Jefferson Avenue because there's of dollars and cents, which Mr. Stevens is going to be talking about in a little bit. Please, if you have questions, don't hesitate.
Yep, so this is the, as we mentioned, the biggest bulk of this capital project proposals related to high school reconstruction and addition and site work. So overall, for the construction dollars at the high school, there's a budget of about $35.3 million, and that's broken up between the addition, renovation, and site work that you see there. On the next slide, we talk about the elementary buildings. Nope, no problem. Yeah. So here we have the elementary buildings. So there is some work taking place at our elementary buildings, primarily focused around some mechanical upgrades needed, as well as toilet room reconstruction, looking to do that at each one of our buildings. We did a larger portion of upgrades here at the high school a few years ago and upgraded and renovated multiple bathrooms throughout the building, added some single gender bathrooms as well. And here we'd be accomplishing the same thing at all of our other buildings, the elementaries and middle schools. At Brooks Hill, there's some mechanical direct digital control replacement that's working into our efficiencies and trying to continue to address those items long-term as a district as well as some HVAC work, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, to do our ventilation upgrades. And as Mr. Provenzano mentioned before, Jefferson Ave, we have cafeteria kitchens across the district that are in need of upgrades, renovations, code improvements. As we look at each one of those areas, we did a major project here at the high schools. We prepared long-term, took our 3 cafeterias that we had, merged into one, and then really created a more fluid kitchen area for our kitchen staff to prepare the food for students. At Jefferson Ave, it's been identified as one of the buildings that has some high needs, as well as where we could accomplish some other improvements in there and improve the code compliance within the area. So those are the pieces there at our elementary buildings.
To be frank, all of our elementary buildings could use renovation and overhaul. And again, there's only so much you could do in a project, and we're trying to be thoughtful and prioritize it based upon the Board of Education's expectations. Question? You mean like Minerva DeLand? You mean Minerva DeLand?
Since one of the grades is coming here, that's 400 or 450 or whatever you're saying kids, that must free up an area for 400 or 450. So are we going to sell that for an antique center or something?
So you're talking about Minerva DeLand?
I don't know.
No, Minerva DeLand, we are going to keep Minerva DeLand simply because it is a facility that we currently use. If you were to go over to Minerva DeLand right now or at any given night, we still have basketball teams, volleyball teams. They need places to practice. We have ensembles performing there periodically. The fields are continually being used. And we're going to plan on using some of that space for office space to house professionals from Balmer Place initially, and then as we move along, district office, as we sell both the district office and Balmer Place in the future.
So in theory, that would be the X's.
Yes.
Yeah, so we did look at options. We looked at our middle schools. We looked at those different pieces. But our middle schools, Adjoina Parent houses around 600 students. Martha Brown houses around a little over 700 students. So with Minerva only housing around 400 students, there's really no space to start to consolidate some of those areas. So the areas of consolidation that we looked at as a district are our administrative offices, and how can we use that space to house the staff that are housed at Balmer Place, and then again looking at the future for the staff housed over at district office on Church Street and using the space that way, as well as potential partnerships with BOCES, if those can exist down the road, and work with BOCES for different programming. We're fortunate to be in Fairport, and we have Monroe and BOCES right up the road here in Fairport as well. So what can we do potentially long-term to partner with BOCES in programming as well? Yeah, so again, kind of the cost containment pieces of not owning, another building like Balmer Place, not having to plow those areas, not having to maintain the infrastructure long-term, the boilers, because eventually those buildings would require replacement of the ventilation areas as well, replacement of windows. Balmer Place, if you looked at the windows at Balmer Place, I believe they're single-pane windows throughout that building. So someday that would need to be replaced and addressed. So it's mitigating some of those expenses as well long-term is where we start to see a lot of those efficiencies and savings as a district. And then, like I said before, moving staff, selling property, and adding back that way.
So when we say sell the property, we're talking about Balmer Place. That's where our professional development and some of our instructional directors are. So that would be a sale of that property, and then we take the professionals in that building and move them to Minerva DeLand, because that's still a functioning facility. But you said it well, the board also expects us to look at opportunities to where can we, based upon certain parameters, where can we possibly rent space to our BOCES partner? Can they use it for some of their programming? Could they use it for office space? Because there's only certain things that we could do. We can't rent to for-profit agencies. There's parameters that we need to follow, but you're right in line with what I think the board is also thinking about. How do we maximize, how do we use that as an asset as we move along? Yes? We do not own that. Mr. Stevens, you want to give a little? Yes.
Nope, we sold that a
was in the
couple of
pandemic,
years
yeah.
ago. Yep. Sold it back to Lollipop, correct? Yep.
Thank you for asking.
Lollipop actually had right of first refusal, so they're interested in the property, and we had no longer any use for it long term from what we saw, so we coordinated and sold it back to them. That money gets placed into capital reserve when we look at year-end fund balance and put that into reserve. And when we get to the cost out slide, you'll see how that capital reserve money gets put back into keeping borrowing, reducing principal borrowing on a capital project. So here's the overall summary of all the buildings and the work taking place. Again, $47 million, a little over $47.5 million in construction. And then in every capital project, we have to budget for construction contingencies. Those are unknowns in the future. Those could be escalation related to bidding, because we don't go out to bid for projects until a couple of years after it's actually voted on, once it's approved by the State Education Department. And then incidental budgets as well. Those relate to all of our fees that are related to our architectural, construction management, insurance, legal fees, testing that takes place during construction, and all of those different aspects, for a total project of $62.25 million. And on the next slide, it has the summary of the costs themselves and how it gets put together. So goal in any capital project is to try to balance the state building aid that we receive back on the project, as well as look at any capital building reserve dollars we've been able to save, to apply that to the principal borrowing overall. So Fairport receives 80% building aid. That's our current building aid ratio. So for every aidable expense we have, we get 80 cents back on the dollar as a district. Through any capital project, there could be unaided portions as a whole when we start getting into exceeding maximum cost dollar allowances that the state provides districts. Those are other pieces as well. So we have the 20% share, and then we also have any unaided work, because the state only aids so much. For example, the STEAM addition being proposed, the state will not aid that in full, but they will provide some partial aid on that. So we're assuming that we'll get back aid on 3 out of the 5 classroom addition that's at Fairport High School in this project. With that, the major balance is how much money do we have in capital reserve, and order to apply that against the portion of non-aided expenses. So we have built up over the past several years $19.2 million in our capital building reserve. Capital building reserve is restricted and has to be put back towards capital projects, and it has to be voted on by the voters in order to be spent out of this project. So that's why that's wrapped in here and tied in. So our overall goal here was to really take as much of our capital reserve dollars that we had, and that, I can tell you, leaves us only with about $400,000 in our capital building reserve as a whole. So we really are taking the money out of those building reserves and applying it to this project to reduce the principal borrowing down to $43 million. You see that on the left-hand side on the screen. Estimated interest of $12.4 million. Important to know that capital projects for reconstruction are aided by New York State for schools over a 15-year period. So these are on the books for 15 years. So we'll borrow for 15 years because the aid's coming in over 15 years. So what we work to try to do is to balance annually to have a stable impact each year over the 15 years. That's where you see the local share per year at $1 million after our debt service, our building aid of $39.8 million, overall $15.7 million, or about $1 million a year over 15 years. That translates to a $59 per year impact on a $200,000 home. It's in terms of budget and capital projects. We try to stay consistent in terms of how that's reflected. Obviously, that dollar is adjusted if a home value is assessed a little bit more, and it's adjusted if it's assessed a little bit less. So that's $59 a year for a $200,000 home over the course of the 15 years. So you can see the assumptions. I talked about a couple of them, but I won't go through each and every one as a whole. But we work hard to try to understand where we believe the state will come in with aid and balance all of those different items out. So again, impact of $59 a year for 15 years for this $62.25 million project after applying the $19.2 million in capital building reserve. Any questions on?
And we definitely don't want to just throw that number out or the details around that. So please, if you have questions, this is the time to do that, of course. Yes?
As it relates to the construction side of things, so we work hard with our teams here, with Campus Construction Management and Labella, to try to project costs, because we've seen price increases and we've seen things rise. But we've also experienced some competitive bidding where we've been very successful in getting some good competitive bids. So trying to project and plan, because we know it goes out a couple of years, that's where our contingency budget piece of the project comes into play as well. So, yep.
It's a fair question.
Yeah, and to be totally honest, if bids come in higher than budgeted or anticipated, there are some times where districts have to readjust and reject bids and rebid and or adjust scope. We do plan through any project in the bidding phase for bid alternates, both on an add alternate side if bids come in favorable, and on a deduction alternate side if bids don't come in favorable. So we try to really plan for that as a whole, and we go through that when we lead up to the bid.
Thank you for coming out.
Thanks for coming.
So before I go on to the next slide, I don't want to confuse what we just talked about with the next slide, because the next slide speaks to the board's expectations of having a facility plan. Right? You need a plan. You just can't have these projects pop up, right? Because it impacts the taxpayer. As a taxpayer, you should have some sort of understanding of what our long-range goals and expectations are. And that was all part of what we were talking about in 2018. I'm really proud of the fact that we do have a facilities plan that stretches out to the next project, 2025. And the reason why we put this slide in here, so you could see that we are talking about making sure that at the end of 2030, because it's going to take another 5-year period, that we are going to get at our elementary schools, because lots of people have concerns, and they're good concerns, of making sure that our environments at the elementary level are just as safe, just as warm, just as engaging, just as flexible, and just as responsive as the ones we're building in the secondary. But we're also taking a look at the district office move there. The office that is on West Church Street now, we plan on selling that office at year's end of construction in year 4 in 2030 and move to the Minerva land. And so what we're going to be doing is just what Mr. Stevens was reviewing. We're going to be saving our dollars using capital reserve funds to help with that, to offset the costs of that move. We also know that our pool, it's the same pool. It's a pool that's being put together. We have an amazing facilities team that works on our pool, does all we can just to keep it running and functional, but it's antiquated. But we can't get it to pull this version of Fairport Forward because of the sequencing and prioritizing of what we need to do in order to get our students over. The pool's going to have to wait. But we're going to be saving capital reserve dollars. We're going to be making sure that debt is properly going off, so it's not that transformational to the taxpayer. And we need to continue to make sure that we're updating our facilities. So over time, as we continue to have projects, we're going to be able to manage the tax impact more effectively. We've always said that there's going to be 3 projects that will have bumps. We hope to get to a point where we're managing projects in predictable fashions once our schools are up to date and they're working at maximum efficiency and as best as they can. But we're not there yet. And we've been saying that our community has been part of conversation about the management and upkeep of our facilities. But this is a long-range plan, and you'll see that in 2025, we're anticipating another referendum. And you'll see the process as outlined earlier. We won't go over each one of them, but we just wanted you to walk away knowing that, hey, we're trying to be thoughtful. We're trying to make sure that we keep our schools operationalized in a way that's highly functional and that meets the needs of our expansive program, which we're all proud of. We have children, grandchildren, family members, friends who attend these schools, and you come to our pep rallies, you come to our parent nights. There's lots of excitement, lots of energy around our schools, and this is just trying to meet that expectation. Yes? I'm sorry about that. Yep. There's only going to be a handful of elementary schools, but if you look at the dollar amount, yes, 300.
Yeah, it's just, so if I can jump in. Yeah, just in this phase, we're just doing, you can see here underneath, toilet room reconstruction. So budgeting 750 square feet of bathroom reconstruction at these elementaries. So there are many other areas, from ventilation to infrastructure to instructional space upgrades, that are on what we have to do every 5 years by the state, called the building condition survey. So there's many other areas of need and wants as we look at our programming as a district that exist on those surveys as a whole. If we took those surveys when we develop any capital project, we take that building condition survey, we look at health and safety items, we look at the useful life items, where it's been listed on there in terms of recommended year of replacement. If we look at that as a whole, it's probably a little bit over $200 million as a whole in terms of work. So there's no way that we could go after $200 million of work. The state doesn't aid us in that kind of a cost allowance for each of our school buildings as a district.
So that's why this focus is primarily on moving Minerva land to the high school. The board always wants to make sure that we're touching all the schools, and this was our effort to, we need to renovate some of our toilet rooms. We're able to get at the Jefferson Avenue cafeteria, as Mr. Stevens indicated, and do a little bit more at Brooks Hill with toilet rooms, mechanical pieces, and making sure that, air handling units and heaters are optimal.
So what is the estimated time of having this piece completed?
This piece completed? Okay, so what I'm going to do right here is go back to this original timeline. These are great questions. Mr. Stevens, want to go over that timeline again?
Yep. So here's the timeline of this proposed project, the 2022 referendum. Really, there will be multiple phases of construction. There are multiple phases of construction and bidding that took place for the 2019 capital project. We did high school work design work first, bid that out so we could get that work started, and then start the clock with what the state has. They have a 5-year rolling clock for available dollars for building aid, that if we use all the dollars up that they've allotted the building in year 1, those dollars aren't available until year 6. So it's important to try to time that so that we free up those dollars long term. And then we had all of our other buildings for the secure vestibules take place in our second phase of construction. So in the summer of, for example, the summer of 23, we have more construction taking place. So you see it's kind of a similar layout here in terms of our construction time periods for 2024 and 25, with the intent and plan. If all goes according to plan and perfectly with bidding and construction, then the construction's complete in 2026. So it really is a 4 to 5 year period of start to finish from.
This will be the work that's tied up into the elementary school, albeit little. This work is tied and it will be phased in once. If we are fortunate enough to get voter approval, then we'll be able to tighten our timeline out and say exactly where construction is happening along the way. But you're correct. It's for the elementary schools that are in the presentation that we just showed.
And we'll be having another referendum before our 9th graders are at the high school. 2025, is that the date was?
To work and to develop those other pieces that were explained in this timeline. Correct. From the pool to the district office sale, and of course, the elementary improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again,
Thank you for the
projected
question.
timeline, no scope has been fully developed. We listed some items on the lower right-hand corner for some potential items that weren't addressed in this project simply because of budget and constraints that we have as a whole in terms of the work and swing space we have. So those are some ideas. Those certainly aren't limited to those as a whole. There may be some other areas as well throughout the district to identify in that.
But
those are-
again, that's why we're sharing this, because we want to continue to get out, it doesn't do us any good if it's just me and Mr. Stevens and the board who are paying attention to this timeline. We want to continue to communicate. This is part of a bigger plan, so we can continue to meet the needs of the community.
And you see this timeline's actually even a little bit longer with multiple phases of submission because we need to be sure that the cost allowance dollars for building aid at the high school and those buildings are freed up before we add on the construction pieces. So we want to make sure that we're trying to maximize the aid there on these future projects as well.
Any other questions? There'll be more community presentations. There's 2 dates listed right here, November 9th and November 29th. I know the Board of Education will be having public sessions, and we'll be talking about this project. There'll be a comment period as well. If you want to speak more or ask questions, by all means, there'll be avenues to do so. Yeah.
I see that the area where the track is now, you have something in the drawing about a shot put area near the new area that you're putting in. What are the plans for the rest of that area?
So this will be another multi-purpose field. For example, to play field hockey, to play, it's grass. It's a grass field. It's field hockey, soccer, lacrosse. Right now, if you go in this area, you start seeing a slope, and you can't put a regulation field there. That's not safe. Kids can turn their ankles. Again, the water flow needs to be mitigated as well. So we're going to make this a playable surface, another field for not only our athletes, but also for PE in school. And you'll have another field inside here.
Right. So that's going to stay natural grass?
These will stay natural grass, yes.
There's no plan to put artificial turf in there?
No plan. No.
Mr. Provenzano, there's also, just talk about that additional parking lot in the center for handicap access to our fields. When we created the mixed-use field in the back, one of our concerns is just being able to get our fans down there safely. And so being able to extend that parking lot into that area closer to those fields brings our families a little bit closer to that. And that's something that we missed when we were talking about that earlier as well.
So this was this is the current tennis area right now, right? We're going to take this area, move the tennis courts back here, and again, give us a functioning tennis facility so our students can compete in Fairport and have competitive sectional matches here in Fairport. But this is going to be a parking area because we are bringing over 70 staff members, right? And so they're going to need places to park, right? And this will also help with event parking as well, which is sorely
Unfortunately, we'll never really truly address the issues at Fairport High School, and then we never have enough parking. So that is very true. But it should help. It should help.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm not sure I understood what you mentioned earlier in terms of the trend in student population, whether it's doing this or this or this.
So we've had the opportunity to bring in some professional services and do an enrollment projection. We've done it twice within the past 5 years because we're trying to measure multiple different times. So you cut once, and trends continue to hold true. We used to have kindergarten classes come in 500, 600. Now we have kindergarten classes coming in at 385, 390. Now we know based upon enrollment experts, they talk about live births birth ratios. Over time in Fairport, this is a positive, we'll have steady growth, anywhere between 30 to 50 students, right? So we know that based upon the projections that we're going to be within the 400 to 450 range for 5, and we could say with confidence 10 years. Now we also know this, people have been living in Fairport and people stay in Fairport. But we also know that there's lots of 4 or 5 bedroom houses that now when people leave, there's only smaller families, families of 1 to 2 children, just because of the changing nature and dynamics. So if people do start leaving and moving, there's not many families based upon what enrollment projections and experts say that are 4 and 5. Like in the 70s, that's what there was, 4 and 5 member households. So we feel confident that these numbers are going to stabilize. Oh, we're at the stable. They're not going to increase based upon our studies. Any other questions? These questions were very helpful to us to understand what's on your mind. This was probably the most active group, which is great. We appreciate the engagement. The questions were, we have, yep, board members right here. Want to say hello? Dr. Mary Caitlin White, Dr. Brian Moritz.
Thank you guys all for coming for your questions. It's been an eye-opener to see all that you do. We don't have any kids, but we take taxes, so we want to know what's going on. But it's eye-opening to see all that you've done. Thank you for your work.
Well, thank you. And there'll be a time in the near future when we're going to invite community members in to see the new science classrooms, to see the new cafeteria, so you could get a sense on what we're trying to accomplish, and you could see how much we've improved and accomplished.
Next time, bring cookies.
You know what? A little tea, a little coffee. That's one of my rules. I broke it. Thank you. Have a good evening. Please drive safely. That's very fair.